Hello everyone, my name is Megan Swift. I am the editor-in-chief of the Daily Collegian, and here we have new president of Penn State, Neeli Bendapudi. So thank you so much for being with us today and for sitting down for this interview. You recently started your position after graduation weekend, just this past spring. So I was wondering, how has the transition been into your new position over the summer, and how did former President Eric Barron help with that?
It's been wonderful. I truly love being here, Megan. I was looking it up this morning. This is the start of week 16, so I'm close to my 4-month mark. It's been a joy because I've had an opportunity to get to meet faculty, staff, students, both at University Park and actually people on World Campus, all of our Commonwealth campuses. It's been terrific. And as some of you may know, I had almost 6 weeks transition time before I started, so it was great to have that overlap as well.
Great. So could you describe your path to Penn State, what drew you here, and sort of talk about some of your past experiences as well?
All right, how long do you have? I'm just kidding. I love higher education. I love the transformative power of higher education. I love the energy of a college campus. So even though through a strange set of circumstances, I've had a wonderful opportunity to be in the private sector almost every year. I had an engagement with either a business or a nonprofit, something else outside of higher ed. I truly treasure being in higher ed. So I got my PhD at the University of Kansas, and then I was briefly on the faculty at Texas A&M, spent the bulk of my academic career at a university that I understand cannot be named here, but it's Ohio State. And then I went back to Kansas to be dean and provost, and after that, most recently, I was president of the University of Louisville. And I was quite content to be there. I routinely turned down other offers because I felt there was more to do. But when the search committee here at Penn State reached out, at first I was like, no, thank you, just like I had said to everybody. But I'm so glad they encouraged me to look at it some more, because the more I looked at Penn State, I realized that there is truly no other university like Penn State in the whole country. That's not hype. That's not just a president bragging on their own university. It's genuine, because 96% of the citizens of this Commonwealth live within 30 miles of one of our locations. And so the idea of a land-grant university that could truly provide a transformative experience, and of course, as you know, at Convocation, I loved it, welcoming all our students. If you look at just the undergraduate population, the fact that we have students from every state, DC, over 70 countries, that was truly something I could not say no to. And of course, being a geeky professor myself, the fact that our research enterprise is so strong also drew me here.
That's great. And so you mentioned the University of Louisville. There have been some speculation about the moves, how fast it was, and how it might have been related to athletics and everything. So I was wondering if you were able to address those rumors today and sort of give your perspective on everything.
It had nothing to do with athletics. I know that there are lots of things. I wish I were that prescient and knew. The reality is the landscape is changing so much. No, it was a decision that was tough, but it's one that I'm so happy to be here.
Great. And also, we had a lawsuit recently come out in July that, allegedly you had retaliated against an employee at Louisville for extortion, for reporting an extortion attempt to law enforcement. So I was wondering if you could touch on that at all, if you're able to comment on that lawsuit.
The difficulty of lawsuits is that you don't get to comment, especially when you're in leadership roles like this. But all I can tell you is I have a stellar record. And all you can do is, over the years, what is the reputation you've built up? What are the teams, and how do you live up to those values? So I'm very confident, as is the university, so we'll just have to be patient, which is a virtue that it's difficult for me to cultivate, but I'm telling you all, it's an important virtue to cultivate.
Yeah, for sure. And just in your new position, obviously you are the first woman and person of color to hold this position at Penn State. So I'm curious, what does this mean to you personally, and what do you think it means to the Penn State community?
I can tell you that many times in my career, I've been the only, all right? So you're the first woman, you're the first person of color in boards and others being the only one. Early on in my career, I used to bristle when people pointed that out because I wanted to say, look, I got picked because I'm the very best for this job. It didn't have anything to do with my gender or my color or being an immigrant or anything of the sort. But as I get older, Megan, I'm actually leaning into it because I have young people come up to me. I have so many students and even faculty and staff who come up and say, we are thrilled that you're in this role. So what I've realized is it's not true that you cannot be what you cannot see. Because if that were true, we would never have any firsts, right? But I do understand that it's more difficult to be something that you cannot see. So the two things that I take away are, if this serves as an inspiration to someone, my goodness, I'm so grateful for it. And I will always strive to be worthy of that. But I also remind myself, my job as president of Penn State is to be the president for every single student, faculty, and staff member, no matter what identities they hold.
That's great. And speaking of, I know there's been a big call from students for more diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. I was just wondering if you have anything in the works in that area, if you could speak to that.
This is a challenge, not just at Penn State, but in higher education overall. I've said to many, many audiences, people outside of higher education hear about snowflakes and safe spaces, and they think that institutions of higher education are these Edens of equity. But really, if you look at it, we are far behind many, many corporate settings. And so to me, it's less 4 months in. It's much less about starting something new as it is about assessing what we are doing. The one trap I do not want us to fall into is doing the checklist of, here are the things we are doing. It's much more important to say, is it having an impact? Are we really making a difference in how we recruit and retain and promote our faculty, staff, and students? So I don't want us to fall into the trap of, I'm doing ABC. I want us to hold ourselves accountable to the outcomes. One other thing I'd like to add here, because this is very important to me. Whenever I've talked about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I've always said we must be places where we welcome diversity of thought as well. So it's truly, institutions of higher education are about those collision of ideas, and hopefully that's where growth happens.
For sure. And I guess on the same note, do you have any other goals for this year specifically in your position, or any more long-term goals?
I can tell you that at any institution I've been, right, my number one goal, number two goal, number three goal would be student experience. And to me, student success, if it weren't for students, we should close up shop. That's why we exist. And so I have said that for this year, I'd really like us to focus on not just bringing students here, but making sure that they graduate, that they go on to something meaningful in their lives, whether it's another job or grad school or whatever it is. So if you look at what are the drivers of student success, it's a silly mnemonic, but to get a whole large institution like ours to embrace it, I wanted to keep it simple. So I'm calling it the ABCs of student success. A is academic preparedness. Are we preparing each of you not just to pass the class, but to make whatever your hopes and dreams for after? Are we preparing you for it? B is a sense of belonging. When you look at why do we lose people, it's not just always just the academics. The C is cost, by the way, in case you didn't realize it. It's not just the academics or the cost, but it's really a sense of belonging. Is this a place where I feel welcome? So I've been asking everybody who gets a paycheck from Penn State to be really looking at how are you contributing individually today to the ABCs of student success.
That's great. Yeah, that's very interesting to hear. So in terms of cost, you mentioned cost. There was the recent tuition raise by the Board of Trustees over the summer. So I wanted to hear your perspective. obviously we're coming off of the pandemic. Students and families are trying to recover financially there. And I think it definitely, some people have come forward with, they were shocked that the raise was so high. So I was curious from your perspective how that decision was made, and what students can expect moving forward.
Absolutely. It's a completely legitimate question, one that I would ask and one that I struggled with too. The idea is, the reality is last year, I don't know how much you all realized, but we at Penn State University went to the board with a $167 million structural deficit. And that is huge. Those are things that you cannot continue over the long run. And this year's projection was that it was going to be even higher. The board is not the bad guy in this, because if I were a fiduciary, I would also say, hey, this is not a sustainable way to move. And so early on, what we had to grapple with is, how are we going to address this? This is not about me, but believe me, I completely understand the struggle of trying to get a college degree. And so to me, what we needed to do was address this big gap through a variety of ways. And I hope you'll let me speak or ask me about how we need all of you to help us with state support as well. We'll get to that in a second. So in the short run, what we needed to do was a number of activities. What are things we'll stop doing? How will we do this? But a tuition increase was unfortunately something we had to do, but I hope you realize what we did. The tuition increase, those dollars went straight to student aid. So all of that increase that we had, because otherwise we would not be able to provide student aid. And what I decided was, of course, the board gets to approve, but that the biggest thing we needed to do was to have no tuition increase for families with household income of $75,000 or less. I understand all the problems, like, hey, how can you draw an arbitrary line? What if someone has one kid versus 5? I get it. But the median household income in Pennsylvania is $63,000. About a year or so ago. It might be slightly off, but you can verify. It's about that range. So our goal was, for at least half of the families in Pennsylvania, we are going to try to keep our tuition at no increase from last year. So that's a nuance that I know you all will pick up on. So for us at Penn State, what caused this huge deficit? We can't. No, if it's your home, you don't get to say we keep running up a debt because some point you don't have the resources anymore. It's a multifactorial problem, so the solutions are not simple. One of the challenges we face is that it's no fault of anyone right now in the General Assembly. This is a historic artifact. Sometime in the 1960s, I understand, there were allocations made to the state-affiliated universities. But the drawback of that, the others have held steady. We have grown. We educate more Pennsylvanians. We educate more Pell Grant students than our sister institutions. However, per undergraduate student, per Pennsylvania undergraduate student, we get far less. Do you see what I mean? We get about $5,000 per Pennsylvania undergraduate student that we educate. And the others get significantly more. It's like 40% more. So when you think about how are we going to tackle our financial situation, this is something we'd have to look at.
Sure, and I'm glad you mentioned the 75,000. That was sort of a question I was going to ask as a follow-up, like how that line was determined and everything. So I'm glad you touched on that as well.
And these are blunt instruments, and candidly, typically a university professor starts July 1. So this is not my budget, right? This was the budget that the previous administration brought in. And for us, looking at it and saying, hey, going forward, we need to be more careful. But obviously, I am publicly telling you that ABCs are my focus. So over time, we'll try to say, what can we do to keep tuition affordable?
And could you sort of touch on how the recent hiring freeze as well sort of factors into that?
Yeah. It's not a hiring freeze. I want you to remember it's a strategic hiring freeze, meaning it does not mean we will hire at all, because we owe it to you. We owe it to our students. We cannot just say we've increased tuition. We need to take a really hard look at where are we spending, what can we postpone, what do we need to do. It is truly strategic. The idea is that there are many interim roles that we are hiring. there are many critical roles. This may be surprising to you, but we even said, nope, no matter what's going on, we're going to hire a new enrollment manager. That was my focus, that someone, it's just to bring us up to speed with Big Ten. When you look at it, I know that I've told you I've spent half my life almost in academe, all my life in academe, but every year I would have time with the private sector. So the reality is that we need to be very thoughtful and mindful. Over the last 5 years, on our Commonwealth campuses, our enrollments have dropped by 20%. Now you tell me, what would you do?
Just to finish up with the talk of the deficient and everything, do you have any idea where that came from, and is there a plan to decrease it in the next few years?
Of course, we don't have a choice. No one gets to run up a deficit forever. So we will tackle it. As for where it came from, it's public. It was last year approved by the board, so I would rather spend time on what the plans are. As with any situation, as you look forward, we need to say, where will we contain costs? How can we be more thoughtful about our spending? We also, no one cuts their way to excellence. This is just a rather crude, quick fix, but we need to say, how will we manage our enrollments? How do we make sure that we figure out how to support the students that come here? So it'll be a multi-year problem, but I tell you what, none of those phases me, because we're Penn State. You know, we are Penn State. I want each of you to remember that. It's not just the students, faculty, staff who are here, who are incredible, but look, there's not another university in the world that has as many living alumni as we do. So it's a challenge, but hey, we are up to it.
Great, and I just wanted to touch on a few other recent happenings. So first, there's been a huge call for, greater transparency and timely warnings and everything related to sexual violence on campus. Last fall, we had the highest number since, I think it was 2019, in terms of timely warnings. So is there a plan on your end, I guess, to address sexual violence on campus, and what would you say to students?
In terms of the statistics, I'll have to look it up, and you all know, as I said, month 4. But the critical factor is we've got to take responsibility for one another. I'm saying that it's not always up to the people who've been victimized to be asked to speak up. That's very easy. Always say, you be careful, you say something. But I want to make sure that everyone says, if we say we are Penn State, are we creating the right culture? Are we holding people accountable? That is obviously a very, very key priority for me. And one assault is one too many, right? It's not just about the numbers. But overall, what I've been given to understand is that we are actually, knock on wood, actually on a good trend in terms of actual behavior that's unacceptable. And that's where I count on all of you, because we all can do everything we can, but to say that is not acceptable, to set the standard for one another on what is okay and what's not okay.
Sure. And another recent happening this past spring, the Lion Shrine was vandalized, and I'm sure you saw the various messages that were written around campus regarding previous student deaths. So I was just wondering, from your perspective, is there anything in place in terms of transparency and safety on campus, for student deaths like that and other instances that could possibly happen in the future? And what was your reaction to that incident?
I think vandalizing the Lion Shrine was a terrible thing to do. And I understand that's going through the legal process as well, whatever happens there. So I understand the need to bring attention, but I felt really heartbroken because it was graduation weekend, as I recall, and the families who've been waiting. And think about it, there's 20% of our students are first generation in their family to go to college. That really, it was like you're taking away an incredible moment for a lot of people. And we do need to be more accountable. We do need to be more transparent. The challenge of the warnings too, or alerts too, is that how do we draw the line? Often we think it's better to be safe than sorry, and so you'll send something out. And that's also a fear, because if people say, oh, it turned out to be nothing, do they start to ignore it? So these are complex questions. I I cannot pretend to say I have all the answers. But obviously, when we talk about responsibility to students, no learning, nothing happens if you're not safe, if you don't feel safe. So that's clearly a very critical priority.
Great. And finally, we recently had the first monkeypox case here at University Park. So just wondering, from your perspective, how does student safety look like with that? Do you have any concerns moving forward about possible outbreaks? And is there a plan in place if something were to occur?
Yeah, obviously we're working on all of these. There's an incredible team that's looking at what do we do. We are at this really interesting inflection point as a society where once again, individual responsibility will become so critical. We'll do everything we can, we come up with plans, but this is where I appeal to all of you, because you're leaders in the community, people listen to you, on setting the standards for what is acceptable, what is not. So we are going to do our best to get the vaccine here. As you probably know, there's a real shortage and they're trying to figure out what else do we do. We have a dedicated team, but once again, I found for every group, but certainly for all of you, what your peers say is so critical to you and how you set the norms for what we do.
For sure. And then just a few more questions. Just what is one message that you would give to Penn State students here for our first week of school, and what has been your favorite part of the job so far?
Students are always the favorite part of any job I've held, because it's not just to pander to you, it's the truth for me. Because why do we do what we do? It's the hope of the promise of what you each will do. We get to bask in the reflective glory of what you do. For first week, what I told our first years as they're starting is, remember this in life, not just for your first week. It's so much easier to keep up than to catch up. So don't play catch up. The first 4 weeks on any campus, you are so excited to see everybody. I joke that for our first years, it would feel like a giant sleepover. All your friends are here and your parents are not. So be careful. You have 4 years to enjoy college. Early on, don't miss any classes. Seriously, don't put yourself in the situation of, I have to catch up. So much easier just to keep up. Sorry, that's like mom and grandma advice in addition to president advice, but that's what I really think.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for answering our questions today and for being here.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure, and I know we've been working on this for a long time, and I wish you and I wish your team the very, very best.